Hi, my name is Beatrice and I'm a junior. And this is where I live. If you'd look where I live, you'd think my life is pretty much like yours. But if you really knew me, you know there's more to the story. I'm a first-generation immigrant from Brazil, and that means that life in my house can be crazy and chaotic and a little bit unconventional. And for example, we speak Portuguese at my house. So it's not always super easy for my parents to figure out school stuff when it's in a different language. And you know, sometimes at parties and stuff, I feel a little bit out of place and like I don't fit in, and even a little bit marginalized. But one thing I've learned from being in an immigrant family is to just embrace my identity, even if it's not like everyone else's, and to be confident in exactly who God made me to be. Hey, I get it, every family has a story. But you can't really know me until you know what it's like where I live. This isn't just my home. It's part of my story, and it's personal.
Hey Tank family, welcome back to another Tank Talk, and we're still in a series called It's Personal. And this week we're saying it's personal because Jesus understands your story. I think that we can all agree that superhero movies are pretty big nowadays. Between Marvel and DC, we have enough movies and video games and spin-off shows to keep us entertained for a long time. Except Disney Plus, they need to get their act together. But one of my favorites is probably Black Panther. When the movie was first released, we were introduced to a hero with an incredible story. In a matter of a couple of hours, it felt like the whole world was saying Wakanda forever. Now, before I saw this movie, I didn't know much about Wakanda, and I didn't think I was the only one either. That's why it was so great of a movie, because the whole movie starts out by telling the story of not just the character of Black Panther, but also his home, Wakanda. I think that's because the writers knew that in order to understand who the Black Panther is really well, we had to understand where he came from. Did you know that the same thing is true for you and me? Just think about this. How many people in our schools, in our neighborhoods, on our own teams, do we assume that we know? We might feel confident that we know the stories of some people just because we know some of the things about them, like their name or what they're good at or what they're into, or when it comes to clothes and music or friends, like we think we know the full picture of who somebody is just because of what we can see. The way that they act, the way that they live, who their friends are, and more. This tells us all we need to know, right? Well, not exactly. See, we can know a lot about a person, but not really know them. Just like in the Black Panther, there's a really good chance that there is more to the stories of the people around us than we see or know. Because here's what I know to be true. Everybody has a backstory. And each and every person we think we know, even there's more to their story than we can really see. And if we really want to know someone, we have to understand where they came from. We have to see more than just what's on the outside. We have to understand the people, the experiences, the beliefs, and more that make them who they are. Now, I think you probably know what I mean because you have a backstory. You know that in your own life, there's more to your story. And you want people around you to recognize that too. I mean, maybe you got angry and you yelled at your sibling this week and you found yourself thinking, man, she would totally understand if she knew about the friend drama that I had going on right now. Or maybe you turned in an assignment late and you thought, man, my teacher would be so much more understanding if she knew that we were having connectivity issues or that my power went out. Or maybe you stopped texting a friend back and thought, man, they have no idea how depressed I am. And if they did, they'd know why I wasn't responding. You see what I mean? The stuff going on that you wish other people would consider, that's your backstory. It's what you're dealing with. It's where you're coming from right now. And if you're like me, you wish people would try to understand that just a little bit more of it from time to time. But I think the question for all of us is this: do we give the same kind of grace and consideration to other people? I know that sometimes I don't. The reality is we rarely consider the backstories of other people. We don't often stop to consider where they're coming from. And because of that, we don't ever really personally know them. So how do you and I begin to see the backstory? How do we make an effort to understand where people are coming from? How do we make it personal? Thankfully, Jesus gives us a great example to follow. Over the past couple weeks, we've been looking at a cool story from Jesus's life. A couple of thousand years ago, he was traveling in the ancient land of Israel and he came across a town that was home to a pretty well-known bad guy. I know we talked about superheroes earlier, but this guy was more of a super villain in his community. Maybe you remember his name. It was Zacchaeus. He was a tax collector, which basically meant that he cheated his neighbors out of money just so that he could keep his wealth and his status. Even though his reputation was rough, when he heard Jesus was in town, Zacchaeus went out and made an effort to see him. He wanted to catch a glimpse of Jesus, so he climbed a tree just so he could spot him in the crowd of people. And what was crazy is that out of the entire town, out of the entire crowd, Jesus notices Zacchaeus up in that tree. And not only that, Jesus walks right over and calls out Zacchaeus by name and tells him to get out of the tree. Why? Well, for a reason no one expected: to hang out with him. Yeah, that's right. Jesus wanted to hang out with Zacchaeus, to spend time with him, to get to know him. And not just anywhere. Jesus wanted to go to Zacchaeus' home, the place where he came from. Take a look. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. I realize that Jesus inviting himself over to Zacchaeus' house may seem a little strange to us, but it would have been absolutely wild in this culture 2,000 years ago. Zacchaeus was not a good dude, and everyone knew that. Jesus knew that too. But Jesus wasn't satisfied with only knowing about Zacchaeus. He wanted to take the step of going right into where he lived. He wanted to really get to know Zacchaeus. See, there's something about where we live that says a lot about who we are. Where we live is usually a place where we're most comfortable. It's a place where our guard comes down and where we can be who we really are. Can you imagine Jesus coming over to Zacchaeus' house and Zacchaeus taking off his sandals and putting his barbecue apron on and kicking back with Jesus? Now I'm not sure that that's exactly how that went down, but one thing is clear: Jesus wanted to make it personal. Sure, he already knew everything about Zacchaeus, but he still decided to take a step into his world and get to know him better. Jesus made it personal with Zacchaeus when he took a step to understand where Zacchaeus lived. Visiting Zacchaeus' home meant that Jesus would get to know him in a very personal way. Jesus would get a glimpse into an important part of Zacchaeus' backstory. Of course, Jesus already knew his backstory because he's Jesus, but the visit showed Zacchaeus that he was accepted, story and all. You see, where we live isn't just a physical address. It's a place that gives others a glimpse into our personal circumstances, situations, and day-to-day lives. Where we live is a part of our backstory. It's the part most people don't typically get to see. And what's cool is that what Jesus did for Zacchaeus was an example of something that Jesus does for me and for you too. See, while he may have walked into just one man's house that day, it gives us a glimpse into the way God stepped into all of our lives when he chose to send his son Jesus to earth. The God who created the universe stepped into our world to understand where we come from, to show us how much he cares, to understand our stories in a real and personal way. Remember, it's personal because Jesus understands your story. He knows our stories because he knows where we live and what it's like to walk in our shoes. He doesn't just see and understand a little bit about us. He knows because he knows our whole story, and he loves us no matter what. And so if the way that we treat other people is going to be personal, then we have to choose to understand their stories just like Jesus does for us, right? So where do we start? Well, before we get to know others, we might just need to become known ourselves. For some of us, our first step might be to acknowledge that Jesus wants to know you personally. In fact, he already knows you better than you know yourself, but you might need to invite him into your story. He wants to be a part of your life in a real and a personal way. And you can talk to your small group leader or a friend that you trust or your parent even about what it means to follow Jesus and experience life the way that he says is best for you. Then it might be time to let someone else into your story. Your step might be to share more of your story with someone else, not just some random person or a stranger. Someone who really cares about you. Someone you trust, who is already a big part of your life. And maybe a great place to start is your small group leader, or some friends, or your parents. But what if you started to share a little bit about where you were coming from? What if you told them a little bit about what your life is really like? What if you opened up to share more of your backstory? It could be that step that helps them know and care about you personally in a way that they couldn't ever before. And maybe you're in a place where you want to make it personal with others, the way that Jesus did for you. And you can do this by giving someone the gift of going second. In other words, you can be the first one to share. You can choose to share a little bit of your own backstory so that other people know that it's safe to share some of theirs with you. And when you share a little bit about what you're living through right now, it can give someone the courage to do the same. And when someone does share their story with you, make sure you choose to listen and ask questions to learn more. When you show someone you care by listening and wanting to know more, you show them just how personal getting to know their story is for you, and that means so much to them. So just imagine if getting to know the stories of your classmates and your teammates and neighbors was something that you took personally. You'd start seeing people for who they really are instead of who you think they are. You'd become known as the person who really cares, a person that people can trust, a person who wants to know people in a real and personal way. You actually have an opportunity to do that this week in small group. It's a place to ask questions, to listen, and to get to know other people's whole stories. And you can share your story with them in return. So remember, it's personal because Jesus understands your story. And as you get ready to share a little bit more in your small groups this week, I want you to think about this question. What's one thing most people don't really know about me? Thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you next week on another Tank Talk. Peace.